أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يوصي نعمه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بهد الهمم ولا يناله غوث الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت محدود ولا أجل ممدود فطر الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالسخر ميدان عرض ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وحبيبنا وحبيب رب العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعن على أعدائهم أجمعين من أول يوم ظلمهم إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المبين وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا صدق الله العلي العظيم. Before I get started, this lecture is sponsored by Brother Asad Zaidi. Please recite a Surah Fatiha for his marhumin. Inshallah, if anyone else wants these lectures to be sponsored, my father's lectures, my lectures, if they want them to be sponsored, and the sawab of these lectures to go to your marhumin, please call someone from the board of the Babylon website, go on there, email them, and if you want these majlis to be sponsored, you're more than welcome to have them sponsored. Please get in contact with someone from the board. But before I get started, please recite a Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of Brother Asad Zaidi. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد بسم الله. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. One of the most hotly debated topics among the different schools of thought is in Islam is the topic of isma, or infallibility of the holy prophets, of the messengers, of the successors to the messengers, and the divine guides that are sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people, even within the Shia school of thought, they have misconceptions about what infallibility is. And I've spoken about infallibility before, and I'm speaking about it now again. Why? Because some of my lectures throughout this whole month, they deal with the prophets. Some of these lectures deal with the history of the prophets. For example, Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, for example, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, for example, all of these prophets that we believe in. And when we look at the history, when we read about the history of these prophets, we as Shias, we have the concept of infallibility. Yet when we look at the history of these prophets, these personalities, we read about mistakes that they made. We read about sins that they've committed. We read about how, even for example in Sayyid Sajadi, there are all of these du'as, where these du'as are recited by the Imam, our fourth Imam. Yet in these du'as, the Imam is asking for the sins to be forgiven. Well, if he is masoom, then why is he asking for sins to be forgiven? If he is masoom, if Hazrat Adam alayhi salam is masoom, then why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, consider him to be from the zalimeen? If he goes near that tree, he will be from the zalimeen. What do these types of words, what do these types of phrases mean when it comes to the imams? What do they mean when it comes to these holy personalities who we believe to be infallible? But to begin with, each and every single one of these roles of prophethood, of messengership, of successors, of divine guides, they all have their own scope of responsibility. However, they all share one thing in common, and that is that they all have been divinely selected to be representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In such a critical role for mankind, it becomes necessary that those assuming these roles must be infallible and purified from committing sins, errors, and any type of these types of mistakes. After all, the prophets, the messengers, and successors are sent to the people to set the correct standards for them and serve as exceptional role models and a perfect being for them to try and emulate. The prophets have to be masum for the same reason for which they were sent, to guide and lead the people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If they were not masum, if they were not masum, if they were not infallible, then there would be a contradiction between what they're saying and what they're doing. Meaning that if they were not infallible, then what they're saying or what they're doing could be right or it could be wrong. But to begin with, the word isma, it literally means protection. In the Islamic terminology, it means infallibility, and infallibility is defined as a spiritual grace, as a lutuf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to a person, which enables him to abstain from mistakes, which enables him to abstain from sins by using his own power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this person lutuf. He's done lutuf on this person. And this lutuf enables this person, this grace enables this person to abstain from all types of sins. This power of isma does not make the masum incapable of committing sin. And this is where a lot of the misconception is within the Shia school of thought, that they think that masum means that the imams, the prophets, the messengers, they're incapable of committing sins. No, a masum refrains from sins and mistakes by his power and will. If it were otherwise, then there would be no merit in being a masum. Meaning what? Meaning these trees, they can't make mistakes. They can't sin. These rocks, these walls, they can't sin. They don't have that power. A masum, a prophet, is not like them. He has that power. He can sin, but the lutuf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because inshallah when we go to later on in the lecture, we'll realize what prevents him from committing those sins. Not that he doesn't have the capability or the ability to sin, but no, there's something that prevents him from sinning. And because there's something that prevents him from sinning, it's continuously with him, and because it's continuously with him, then he doesn't commit any sins. A masum is able to refrain from sins because one, they have the highest level of righteousness. Two, because their ever-present consciousness and love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And three, certain knowledge about the consequences of committing certain sins. When these three aspects, when a personality knows these three aspects or has these three aspects within themselves, then it naturally results in them not committing sins. For example, we come across ordinary people who are very upright in their character and would not even dream of committing certain sins or crimes. Why? Because the strength of their character makes them relatively infallible person. For example, it's within the power of any person to run naked on the street. It's within my power to gouge my own eye out if I wanted to. I have this power, I have this ability. But would a person who was brought up as a good human being, as a good Muslim, would they ever think about running outside in the street naked? No, because it's far below their dignity to behave in this way. It's not impossible for them to do so, but they will never even imagine doing it. Why? Because they have been taught and brought up with the idea that such behavior will tarnish their honor and it is beneath the dignity of a civilized human being. That's the reason a sane person would not run on the street naked. Why? Because they know that this isn't something for them to do. This action is below them. Similarly, though a masum has the ability to commit a sin, they never imagine of committing a sin. Because why? The love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their heart leaves no room for displeasing Him by committing sins. And two, they fully are aware of the consequences of committing some of these sins. For example, crimes. The closest thing in this world that we have to sins are crimes. In any given country, If I know what the consequence of committing a crime is, what would I do? Would I go and commit that crime? And I knew that I was going to be punished for that crime. When I know that I'm going to be punished for that crime, when I know the consequence for that crime, and I know for a fact that, you know what, I will have to answer to the authority for this crime, would I go commit that crime? No. But do I have the power? Do I have the ability to go and commit that crime? Yes, I do. No one's taken that power from me. No one's taken that ability from me. That ability is within myself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who decided to guide mankind, also intended to send immaculate and perfect human beings as role models and examples. If they were not infallible, then it would have been extremely difficult even to believe in the message that they brought, let alone live our lives the way they lived their lives. There would be no trust or confidence in whatever they say. It could be true, it could be false. Sending fallible prophets, or sending prophets that sinned or that committed sins throughout their lives, would have defeated the very purpose for which they were sent. For the prophets, they were sent to lead and guide mankind, for the people to follow and obey. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say in Surah An-Nisa? He says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that, and we did not send any messenger except that they should be obeyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission. The verse very clearly presents the divine social order. The sole purpose of the prophets on this earth is to be obeyed by their followers. Such absolute obedience and such absolute obedience cannot be possible unless the prophets were masoom, unless the prophets were infallible, free from sins. If they were ghair masoom, then people would be questioning their deeds and actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He say in the Quran? Chapter 4, verse number 59. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasulah wa ulil amr minkum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obey the messenger and those in authority from amongst you. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's ordering us to obey Him and the messenger. And there are at least 10 other verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has used the imperative forms to order the believers to obey the prophets and messengers. The imperative form meaning amr, He's commanded us to obey. And besides these verses, there are also many verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the virtue of obeying the prophets and dreadful consequences of disobeying them. And in most of these types of verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned obedience of His messengers alongside obedience of Himself. In one verse of the Quran, verse number 80 of Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Man yuti'ir rasula faqad ata Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that whoever obeys the messenger, he indeed obeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This statement on the part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have been impossible if the prophets and messengers were not infallible. What do I mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse that whoever obeys the messenger indeed has obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not make mistakes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not commit sins. So if we were to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the messengers that are sent through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they themselves would have those character traits with them. Otherwise we would have found ourselves in an impossible situation. A non-masoom prophet or messenger urging us to do something which is wrong. Should we follow it or should we not? In both cases, we would be doomed. If we obeyed the Prophet and committed the sin, then we would be guilty of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has told us many times in the Quran and not to commit sins. If we disobeyed the Prophet and refused to commit the sin, then we would be guilty of disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has told us to obey the prophets and messengers in an absolute way. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? He says, wait patiently for the command of your Lord and obey not from among them a sinner or an ungrateful person. And this verse of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells everyone not to follow the lead or not to follow the commands of a sinner or an ungrateful person. In this verse of Surah Al-Insan, Allah tells us not to obey the sinners or the ungrateful ones. And in the previous verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to obey the prophets. When you put the verses together, the conclusion you come up with is that the prophets cannot be sinners, because if they were, then there would be a contradiction between what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. On the one hand, He doesn't want us to follow sinners, but on the other hand, He wants us to follow His prophets that sin. We Shia believe that the prophets were masoom, sinless and infallible. They did not commit any sin, neither a major sin nor a minor sin, neither intentionally nor unintentionally. And this applies to them from the beginning of their lives to the end of their lives. Whereas the other school of thought, they differ in their opinion amongst themselves. The Sunni school of thought, the four branches within the Sunni school of thought, they differ within themselves about the infallibility of a prophet. Some say that the prophets are only infallible when relating revelation. Some say that they aren't infallible at all. And some maintain that they are infallible only from when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands them to start preaching. And the years before that, they were just like you and me. Meaning they committed sins, they committed mistakes. In terms of how infallible a prophet is, they also differ amongst that. All Sunnis, they believe that prophets could not tell a lie, neither intentionally nor by mistake, nor could they be infidel before or after the announcement of their prophethood. But tonight I don't want to look at what the other school of thought says. What I want to do is, because tomorrow, the lecture I have prepared for tomorrow will deal with pre-Adam, the existence of the world before Adam, what it was like before Adam, if there were any creatures before Adam, are there any creatures outside of Adam, any other creatures other than mankind in this universe. Because my lecture, this first lecture, is dealing with Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, that I need to prepare. This is basically a preparatory lecture for that lecture tomorrow. Why? Because a lot of the questions that arise about infallibility come from Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. If we don't understand infallibility, then we won't understand the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. So it becomes very difficult to defend the stance of infallibility when the other side, they come and they say, look, Hazrat Adam was a prophet and he disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hazrat Dawood was a prophet and he made a mistake. Hazrat Yunus was a prophet and he made a mistake. Hazrat Musa was a prophet and he asked for forgiveness. If all the prophets are infallible, then why are they asking for forgiveness and why are they disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this is exactly what I want to deal with, inshallah. In the next 20 minutes that I have, we'll look at Hazrat Adam alayhi salam specifically, look at his story and look at those verses of the Quran that talk about him committing a sin, that talk about him asking for repentance. The way they're translated into English, this is the way they're translated. But we'll look at that so we put a layer for our lecture for tomorrow, because tomorrow we'll deal with Hazrat Adam alayhi salam himself. But the question that most people have on their mind is about Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. And you have to remember that the Quran itself, it says that He is the one who has sent down to you the book. Most of it verses are decisive and they are the basis of the book, and others they're allegorical. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this in chapter 3 verse number 7. There are some verses of the Quran that are allegorical and that need interpretation, that need explanation. The interpretation and the explanation that can only come from those people who understand the Quran. And those people, we as Shias, we say the only people who truly understood the Quran were the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, and that was it. Those were the only ones who truly understood the Quran. So we get our explanation, we'll get our tafsir of the Quran from them. So when the Quran itself is saying that there are some verses that are allegorical, those who do not differentiate between the clear and the allegorical verses will surely get confused when they apparently find two conflicting messages from the verses of the Quran. What happens, there's one verse that is supposed to be taken literally, another verse that is supposed to be taken allegorically, but apparently there's a contradiction between them. But what people don't realize is that this verse needs to be taken literally, but this verse is not taken literally. There's a meaning to this verse, and that meaning is what needs to be taken. The issue of Isma, it is one of these issues in which people have become victim of confusion. And the biggest question that people have is about Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, O Adam, dwell you and your wife in the garden, so eat from wherever you desire, but do not go near this tree, for then you will be of the transgressors. وَلَا تَقْرَبُ هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He had told Prophet Adam alayhi salam not to go near the tree. If he does, he will be from the Zalimeen. And this is the way it's translated. In his story, he eats from that tree, he becomes one of the Zalimeen, and his punishment is that he gets kicked out of heaven and he gets sent down to earth. And according to the experts of Islamic jurisprudence, this is where people get confused. They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, a command, he disobeyed the command. When he disobeyed the command, then he committed a sin, and because he committed a sin, therefore he's not masoom. But people don't realize that there are two types of commands from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And according to the experts of Islamic jurisprudence, the orders given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are two types. Al-Amr al-Mawlavi, which is a legislative command, and these types of orders, they must be implemented. And if someone disobeys this type of command, Al-Amr al-Mawlavi, then they have committed a sin and they are liable for punishment. For example, the command to recite the daily prayers, or the command to not eat pork. These are Amr al-Mawlavi, Umur al-Mawlavi, meaning that if we neglect this command, or if we neglect these commands of our daily prayers of not eating pork, then we have committed a sin, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can rightly punish us. The second type of command, Al-Amr al-Irshadi, which is an advisory command. And such orders are advisory in nature. Their purpose is to inform the people about the consequences if they do not obey this advisory command. However, if someone disobeys such an order, then he or she is not committing a sin. But of course, if they do disobey that advisory command, they will have to face the consequence of not following that advice. For example, a fiqhi example, the command to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, or the command to recite the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What kind of command is this? Is this Amr al-Mawlavi or is this Amr al-Irshadi? The fuqaha, they say that this is Amr al-Irshadi, meaning that it's an advisory command. But if someone slaughters the animal and neglects saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, have they committed a sin? No, they've not committed a sin. Are they liable for a punishment for not saying Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim? No, they're not. But because they did not recite Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, they lose the right to eat that animal. In our fiqh, it's stated that we recite the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we slaughter. But if we don't recite the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that a sin on our part? No. This is an advisory command. But because we have not followed through with this advisory command, what happens? There's a consequence that we have to pay. That consequence is what? That we cannot eat that animal. For an everyday example, someone is sick. They go to the doctor complaining of cough, complaining of headache. They go to the doctor, and the doctor, they prescribe them a certain medication, and they advise them to take this medication. Now, if they don't take the medication, have they committed a crime? No. Have they committed a sin? No, they have not. But what will happen to them if they do not heed that advisory command of the doctor? They'll have to face the consequences of not taking that medication, which is what? Which is that their health will be worsened, which is that they'll get even more sick. This is just what comes out, or this is just what the consequences of not following that advice. That means that not all commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are mandatory or prohibitive in nature. The advice given to Adam and Hawa was not of a legislative nature, it was not Amr al-Mawlavi. The prohibition of going near that tree and eating its fruit was Amr al-Irshadi, and going against such an order is not a sin. At most, the doer will have to face the consequence of ignoring that advice. In the case of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam and his wife, Lady Hawa, the consequence they faced was cancellation of them being guests of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the garden. That was their consequence, because they did not follow that Amr al-Irshadi. You have to remember that they were not supposed to stay in the garden in paradise forever. They were created for earth, and their stay in that garden was meant to be temporary. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? Those who believe that Hazrat Adam committed a sin describe the eating of the forbidden fruit as the sin, and Hazrat Adam's expulsion from the heaven as the punishment. However, this relationship between the sin and its punishment is not valid because of two reasons. First and foremost, Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, he was destined to come to this earth anyway. Sahib Tafsir Mizan, Allama Hussain Tabatabai, he's the one who makes this argument. He says that Hazrat Adam was to come to this earth to begin with anyway. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before he even created Adam, he says, what did he say? وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when he says to the angels that I am going to place a khalifa where? On earth. Hazrat Adam was that khalifa, and he was meant to be placed on earth. So coming of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam to earth could not have been a punishment. Whether or not he ate the forbidden fruit, Hazrat Adam would have come to the earth anyway. So then how is that a punishment? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before he created Hazrat Adam, he had already decided that he would come to earth. Now that he's come to earth, that's a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That doesn't make any sense. And this is exactly what Sayyid Hussain Tabatabai, he says in his Tafsir Mizan. Secondly, if coming of Hazrat Adam to the earth was a punishment of eating the forbidden fruit, then he should have been returned to paradise right after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave him. He should have been returned to paradise. Forgiveness, it means cancelling of the punishment. Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, he should have been taken back to paradise. But did this happen? No, it didn't happen. Which proves that Hazrat Adam's coming to the earth was not a punishment, and eating of that fruit was not a sin. The garden or the paradise is not the place for test and trial. It is this earth on which human beings have been destined to go through test and trial by obeying the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The concept of sinning in case of human beings is connected to the worldly life, not the life before this life, not the life before the world. And in the story of Hazrat Adam itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he makes this point clear when he orders Hazrat Adam to go to earth. He says, you both get down from this garden, some of you being the enemies of the other. When he was talking to Hazrat Adam, Hazrat Hawa, Lady Hawa and Shaitan, some of you being enemies of the other. A guidance will certainly come to you from me. And then whoever follows my guidance, he shall not go astray, nor will he be unhappy. But whoever turns away from my reminder, then he shall surely have a wretched life, and we shall resurrect him blind. The order given to Hazrat Adam in heaven is not the same as the orders given to human beings in this world. It is disobedience of orders given on this earth that constitutes sin. Shaitan himself, he knows that he does not have the power to mislead the prophets. He knows that he doesn't have the power to mislead the messengers, and he knows that he doesn't have the power to mislead the awliya Allah, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has looked after. When he was given respite by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until the day of judgment, What does he declare? Shaitan lanatullah alayhi, what did he say? He says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I swear by your might, O Lord, that I will surely mislead them all except the devoted servants of yours from amongst them. Were there any servants more devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the prophets? No, of course not. So even Shaitan lanatullah alayhi, he admits that he cannot mislead these servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then now getting back to the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, what about the words in the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam that imply that he committed a sin? وَلَا تَقْرَبَ هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. But do not go near this tree, for then you will be of the transgressors, you will be of the zalimin. After studying Isma from the Quranic point of view, when we come across such words, we have to realize that we interpret them, we translate them in a way that they're in harmony with other verses of the Quran. Meaning what? Meaning the word zalimin. The word zalimin is the plural of the word zalim, and zalim comes from the word zulm. When you look at the classical Arabic dictionaries, zulm, it has 4 meanings to it. One meaning is to put something in the wrong place. To put something in the wrong place, meaning a glove is meant to be worn on your hand. If I was to wear it on my feet, I've done zulm. Socks are meant to be worn on your feet. If I was to wear them on my hands, then I've done zulm. And other examples such as this. The second meaning that they give for zulm is to oppress. To oppress. The third meaning that they have for zulm in the classical Arabic dictionary is to make haste or to hurry. And the fourth definition that they give for zulm is to come to harm. When there are 4 definitions of the word zulm in the dictionary, the problem is that the majority of people, the majority of mankind, what have they done? Because they just only know one definition, they've applied this one definition to the verse. And which definition is that? The definition of oppressing. Oppression. That's the definition. To put something in the wrong place, that's the definition. But when you look at the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam and you put it into perspective, you see that the last 2 definitions of zulm, they're congruent and they work with the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. Those last 2 meanings of zulm being to make haste or to hurry and to come to harm. So how would this verse be translated then? وَلَا تَقْرَبَ هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. But do not go near this tree, for then you will be of the transgressors. No. The translation would be, do not go near this tree, for then you will be of one of those, or you will be of those that make haste or that hurry. Meaning what? Meaning that Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, from the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already intended that he would come to harm. Now, if he goes to near this tree, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already intended for Hazrat Adam to come down to earth. Now if he goes near this tree, what will happen? That coming down to earth, Hazrat Adam, by going near this tree, by eating from the fruit, what has he done? That time period, he's hastened that time period. Now he will come down to earth quicker. He will come down to earth faster. That's one. The second definition of zulm, we said, was to come to harm. Do not approach this tree, otherwise you will be one of those who puts themselves into harm. This definition of zulm also works with the story of Hazrat Adam when you put it into perspective as a whole. How? Here, harm would mean what? Facing the difficulties of the earthly life and losing the comforts of the heaven. When Hazrat Adam was in the garden, when he was in the heaven, he didn't have to toil for anything. He had everything at his disposal. But now, after going near this tree, what had happened? Now he's coming down to earth. So he put himself into harm in a way that now he has to toil for his livelihood. He has to go search for his food. Before that wasn't the case. 1, 2. In the same story, we read in the story of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, فَأَسَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. فَأَسَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. And this too, they've taken it to mean that Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, he disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there you have it. Prophet Adam, he disobeyed Allah, and disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a sin. But we had already said in the beginning, disobedience are of two types, or disobedience of commands are of two types of commands. Which type of command was this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allama Hussain Tabatabai, he says in his tafsir that this was not Amr al-Mawlavi, this was Amr al-Irshadi. And we had already said that if you do not follow Amr al-Irshadi, then it's not a sin. But if you do not follow Amr al-Irshadi, you still have to face the consequence of not following that Amr. And the consequence was what? The consequence was that Hazrat Adam would have to come down to earth. That was the consequence. The consequence was that he would haste the coming down of Hazrat Adam to earth. The consequence was what? The consequence was that he would oppress himself. Oppress himself in what? That in heaven, in the garden, he was completely free to do what he wanted. But now he has to toil for everything. So unless someone can prove that this was Amr al-Mawlavi which was disobeyed, then we cannot say that he committed a sin. Similarly, the word ghawa is used in the same sentence. فَأَسَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. Many translators have taken the word ghawa to mean he erred, he made a mistake, or he went astray. But if we take ghawa to mean he made a mistake, this still does not necessarily mean sin. That type of mistake can also be applied to tark al-awla. Tark al-awla, which is leaving the more appropriate behavior. Meaning you have two choices, two good choices, one better, one good. You've left the better one, you've made a good one. Leaving the better choice. That's tark al-awla. And these types of tark al-awla, they're permissible for prophets. They're permissible for aima. In disregarding the advisory command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Adam alayhi salam, he's guilty not of a sin, but not of living up to the appropriate behavior which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted from a prophet or messenger of God. Secondly, and this is where I'm going to finish this lecture because it's almost time for Salatul Maghrib. When you look at Lisan al-Arab, the classical Arabic dictionary, it said that ghawa, it comes from the word al-ghayyu. And al-ghayyu, it has two meanings. It has a meaning of zalal and it has the meaning of khayba. Khayba, it means discomfiture or embarrassment. So what would Hazrat Adam, when it has these meanings also, why are we just looking at why are we translating it with one meaning in mind? When it also has when that word has different meanings also, why are we translating the sentence with just one meaning in mind? When it has meanings of discomfiture and embarrassment. But then you might ask, what did he have to be embarrassed about? He could have been embarrassed that he committed tark al-awla, or he could have been embarrassed because of the fact that after they ate from that forbidden tree, their private parts were showing. Whatever the case was, embarrassment also works. But if Adam did not commit a sin, then why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about repentance for Adam and forgives him from himself? First and foremost, if we look at Hazrat Adam alayhi salam's life and we say that that was tark al-awla, then even if it was tark al-awla, Hazrat Adam could still ask for forgiveness for not committing the better act. He committed a good act, but he didn't commit for letting go of the better act. Because he let go of the better act, could you not ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them for that? But if you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them for letting go of the better act, then does that mean that you've committed a sin? Or are you asking for repentance because you've committed a sin? No, of course not. Secondly, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks to Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, or the way the tone that He has with Hazrat Adam alayhi salam when He tells him to leave from paradise, when He tells him to leave from the garden. Some people look at the tone and they say that the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He got mad, tells you that He committed a sin, tells you that He committed a mistake. No. Hazrat Adam alayhi salam, he was expected to have a certain behavior. He was expected. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made all of the angels do sajda in front of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. It was a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the angels to do sajda, but at the same time, who was the qibla for that sajda? Hazrat Adam alayhi salam was the qibla for that sajda. And why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the angels do sajda? Inshallah, we'll deal with that tomorrow or the day after when we look at the life of Hazrat Adam alayhi salam. But when you look at society even today, kings, queens, princes, they're not supposed to act like the normal people. Their morals must be more refined. The same way Hazrat Adam alayhi salam should have been more refined. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made all the angels do sajda towards Hazrat Adam. And inshallah, if this part of Isma is not clear, we'll continue to explain it as we get to those prophets of Islam where in the Quran it apparently, or it looks like they have committed a mistake. When we get to Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, we'll talk about it again, and we'll see how these definitions apply to him. When we get to Hazrat Yunus alayhi salam, inshallah, we'll talk about Isma and we'll see how it applies to him, because this has caused a lot of confusion within the Islamic community and within the Shia community too about Isma and what infallibility really is. But inshallah, we'll deal with this when we talk about these personalities one by one and see how their lives were like, what they had to deal with. And when we come to the Holy Prophet, we'll see how the Holy Prophet how he dealt with the mushrikeen of Makkah when he was in Makkah, and how he dealt with the Muslims when he came to Medina itself. But at the end, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sins. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the sins of all the mu'mineen, mu'minat. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive the sins of all those marhumeen, mu'mineen, mu'minat that do not have anyone to ask for forgiveness on their behalf. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep the Imam of our time safe, make his reappearance as soon as possible, and let us, our families, and anyone that's willing to sacrifice their life for him and his cause. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And please, once again, this lecture, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the sawab for every word of this lecture goes to the marhumeen of Brother Asad Zaidi. And if anyone wants to sponsor these lectures, please get in contact with him and sponsor these lectures. So the sawab for these lectures can go for your marhumeen, can go to your marhumeen also. And please, I ask again, recite Surah Fatiha one time and Surah Ikhlas 3 times for the marhumeen of Asad Zaidi. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Inshallah, 9 o'clock will be my father's speech in Urdu. From 8:30 to 9 o'clock will be Dua Iftitah and Dua Faraj, inshallah. And I will see you all again tomorrow. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.